Good morning.
Dr. Scordiello, if I could ask you some questions, just turning back a little bit from what you were testifying to about yesterday. You had mentioned in your testimony yesterday that you had received some, in addition to the internal and external examination that you conducted with Mr. O'Keefe, you had received some other material that you had reviewed, correct?
Correct.
Now, included within that material was some material from the state police as far as the investigative agency investigating Mr. O'Keefe's death.
Correct.
Now, is that is that typical? Is that abnormal? If you could describe sort of in general terms, as far as what, if any, communication would you typically have with the investigating body or agency in relation to any sort of autopsy or examination you do?
Yes. In Massachusetts, under Massachusetts law, the medical examiner's office is responsible, and our role is to determine the cause and manner of death by doing an autopsy. The scene, or the scene of death, or the place where the decedent is found, is controlled by the district attorney's office, and state police will do an investigation. When we accept a case into our office, we request reports, police reports, to explain and describe the circumstances of the death. It could be a house, it could be somewhere else, it could be outside. Every case comes with a police report, and we review that police report, and if we feel that we need more information, then we contact the investigating body and ask for more information, again, depending on the case.
And specifically in this case, in regard to Mr. O'Keefe, did you reach out to get some more information?
I did reach out, yes.
And was that in part in relation to what you were talking about in your testimony yesterday, as far as the diagnosis of hypothermia and trying to sort of better understand the circumstances?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Why did you reach out?
I reached out because when the case was presented to us, and after I did the autopsy, I did not have all the information that I needed in order to certify the manner. The cause of death to me was, I was able to determine the cause of death from the autopsy. When an event is unwitnessed, we usually reach out to the investigating agency and ask them whether they have any more information than they did on the day that the autopsy was done, because investigations sometimes take some time. So in the days and the weeks following the autopsy, I reached out and asked if there was any more information than what I was originally presented with. Was there any video from the surrounding areas? Did anybody come forward to say that they actually witnessed whatever happened? Again, by the time I was ready to finalize the case, and we have approximately 3 months or 90 days from the day of the autopsy until we issue a report, I was not provided with enough information for me to be able to determine the manner.
Now, Doctor, do you recall specifically who it was that you spoke with from the state police?
Yes, I documented that I spoke with Trooper Proctor, I believe, twice.
And with reference, not asking you anything as far as what that conversation consisted of, but as far as the tone of that conversation, did you feel pressured or coerced to come up with a certain determination?
No, I did not.
And even if you had been, what would your response have been in reference to that?
My response was that I am responsible for what goes on the death certificate, and unless I have enough information, clear and convincing evidence, I cannot determine a manner.
May I approach?
Yes.
Doctor, I'm showing you 5 photographs that I gave you yesterday. Do you recognize those?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize those to be?
I recognize these as photographs of Mr. O'Keefe's body. I believe these were taken at the hospital. One of them is a photograph taken at the time of autopsy.
Thank you. May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm going to seek to introduce and the next exhibits.
Ms. Little?
No objection. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your Honor, I have a moment. I just want to make sure they're in the
Yes.
correct order. May I approach again?
Yes.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, may I publish these for the jury?
So jurors, remember the instruction I gave you yesterday on these photographs, okay?
Ms. Gilman, if I can have photograph 2853. Doctor, do you recognize what's up on the screen?
Yes, this is a picture taken of Mr. O'Keefe's body.
And Doctor, if you could, using the laser pointer, that you have there, direct the jury's attention to what, if anything, you observe of significance in this photograph related to the injuries that you were testifying about this.
Yes, so first thing you notice is the medical intervention, which I talked about yesterday. There's the defibrillator adhesive pads on the chest. There is what's known as a C collar, a cervical stabilization collar for the neck, and he has been intubated prior to going to the hospital. The injuries that are obvious in this picture include the abrasions on his right forearm and arm. And you can see here, there is discoloration of the upper eyelid of the right eye with some blood that's dripping. That's the orbital or supraorbital ecchymosis that I described before with, we're too far to see the very, very small laceration that is present there, but that's what's causing the bleeding.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 2857. Now, Doctor, this is not before you at the current time. It's currently marked as Exhibit 442. Do you recognize what's up on the screen?
Yes, this is a picture of the abrasions that I described in my report. Posterior upper arm and forearm. You can see that they have some sort of pattern to it. Anytime we see a pattern, we try to document it as best as we possibly can.
Now, Doctor, with reference to these injuries, as far as the abrasions to Mr. O'Keefe's right arm, what kind of role did that play as far as your determination, as far as cause of death of Mr. O'Keefe?
These are superficial abrasions to the skin. They are not lethal. They're not contributory to the cause of death. The trauma that I observed on the head along with the hypothermia are the two factors contributing to his death. These are present, they're noted, they're described, they're photographed, but I do not know how they came to be, and I did not contribute them to the cause of death.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 286. Doctor, returning to the exhibits of the photos that you have before you, do you recognize what's up on the screen here?
Yes, this is a photograph of Mr. O'Keefe's right hand. This is the dorsum or the dorsal aspect of the hand as opposed to the palm. And you can see that there are some contusions or bruises. There's a larger one here and two very small ones here. This particular contusion has two pinpoint small defects associated with it. I believe this could be due to attempts at gaining IV access during the many attempts of resuscitation, but I cannot be absolutely sure.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 2865. And Dr. Scordello, if you could, again, using ways to point direct jury's attention to what, if anything, of significance you note in this photograph.
Again, this is a slightly closer view of Mr. O'Keefe's face. You can see the discoloration, the ecchymosis on the right eye with a slight amount of bleeding. You can see here that there's also some discoloration of his left eyelid.
And Doctor, with reference to the other injuries that you were testifying about yesterday, as far as the small cuts or abrasions or lacerations, are those visible in this photograph as well?
I can't hear your question. If you could just repeat it and a little louder.
Sure. My apologies, Doctor. With reference to this photograph, as far as your testimony yesterday in regard to the other smaller injuries around the nose and eyes area of Mr. O'Keefe, are those visible in this photograph as well?
You can see some discoloration of the nose, but this is not a very good picture of it. I think there's a linear abrasion on the left side of the nose that I described, and it's probably this.
Ms. Gilman, could I photograph 2877? And Doctor, if you could, again, using the laser pointer, direct your attention to what, anything significant you observed in this photograph.
Yes, this is a view of the left side of Mr. O'Keefe's face. You can see the discoloration of the left eyelid, and now you can see this linear abrasion on his nose and a small abrasion more towards the middle of his nose.
Ms. Gilman, lastly, from this set, if I could have photograph 9488. Same, Dr. Scordello, if you could, using the laser pointer, direct your attention to what, if anything significant you observed in this.
This is the laceration to the back of Mr. O'Keefe's head. You can see this defect here. It's ragged. It's a typical classic blunt impact injury, and you can see the abrasion, the scrape that is adjacent to it.
Thank you, Doctor. I'm just going to take that. Before we get out the lights, thank you. Now, Doctor, with reference to what you were testifying yesterday as far as the subscapular bleeding, bleeding under the scalp, was that more or less prominent on one side versus the other side of Mr. O'Keefe's scalp?
Yes, it was more prominent under that laceration that we just looked at.
And so would that be more prominent on the right side, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, you testified yesterday about a blunt object injury in relation to the injury to the back of the head, then leading to the fractures and the bleeding in the brain, correct?
Correct.
And then further leading to the ecchymosis, is that correct?
In the eyes, yes.
Now, that blunt object, what, if anything, can you say about what that blunt object would be?
It could be any blunt object.
Now, from your training experience with reference to the number of autopsies and examinations that you've conducted over the years, would that blunt object's possibility include the ground, especially if it was frozen ground?
Objection.
Ask the question differently.
The injuries that you observed to the back of Mr. O'Keefe's head, skull fracture, would that be consistent with a fall to the ground?
It could be.
Would that be consistent with being projected by an object, say in a pedestrian collision, and then striking your head on the ground?
It's possible.
The arm injuries that you observed, would those be consistent with scratches from either glass or a piece of plastic or a piece of metal?
It's possible.
And the injuries that you observed, would that be consistent with injuries that you observed in other cases of a pedestrian collision?
They're not the classic pedestrian injuries that we observe, no.
And to that point, as far as when you say classic, as far as a pedestrian collision is concerned, you've conducted autopsies on a number of different pedestrian collisions over the course of your career, is that correct?
Yes, I have.
Do they all sort of mirror each other? Is there sort of a disparity depending on how the person interacted with the car?
Objection.
Sustained. Watch the form, Mr. Lally.
What, if anything, are every injuries from a pedestrian collision the same?
No.
And why not?
It depends on many factors. It depends on the position of the body, of the pedestrian or the person being struck. It depends on whether they are moving or standing still. It depends on the speed of the car. It depends on whether brakes were applied or not. There's a lot of factors that come into play.
Would another factor be sort of the shape of the vehicle that strikes a pedestrian?
That's also possible. Yes, that's a factor.
And did you have occasion to see any photographs, or have you seen any photographs in relation to the defendant's vehicle in this case?
I have seen photographs, yes.
And the size or shape of that vehicle, what, if any, significance did that have to you as far as your examination?
Objection.
I'll allow it.
When we have a potential vehicle, clearly we look at the height, because one of the things that we do in most or all pedestrian or people struck by a motor vehicle is look at the legs, because in the majority we see injuries to the legs from the bumper of the car. Again, depending on the kind of car, the size of the car, and the height of the bumper. So in Mr. O'Keefe, I did not see any injuries in the lower extremities. And looking at the car, I did note that it was a much bigger car with much higher, I would say much higher tail light bumper. It was not a sedan or a car that's low to the ground where the bumper would be at the level of, let's say, the knee or slightly above or slightly below.
And again, I believe yesterday in your testimony you indicated that the skull is a pretty thick bone, is that correct?
Yes.
Sustained.
With regards to the thickness of the skull bone, what, if any, significance, or what, if anything, can you say as far as the type or amount of force that would be necessary to cause the fracture that you observed?
Objection.
Overruled.
I would consider the amount of force to be significant, again, without being able to quantify it.
Can I have a moment, Sharon?
Yes.
Now, Doctor, from the internal and external examination that you conducted in regard to Mr. O'Keefe, as well as the other materials that you reviewed, were you able to come to an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to the cause of death of John O'Keefe?
Yes, the cause of death was due to blunt impact injuries of the head and hypothermia.
Thank you, Doctor. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
All right. Cross-examination.
Good morning, Dr. Sordibello.
Good morning.
Ms. Little, keep your voice up.
Absolutely. You testified regarding a number of injuries that you referred to as blunt impact injuries, correct?
Yes.
And to be clear, blunt impact injuries are a very, very large category that includes contusions, lacerations, abrasions, and fractures.
Correct.
And you testified similarly that a blunt object can also refer to a large range of objects. Is that right?
Correct.
And I think yesterday you gave the example of a microphone being a blunt object.
Correct.
It could also include something like a baseball bat,
Correct.
a dumbbell,
Could be.
the ground,
Yes.
or a German Shepherd's claws.
Claws. Possibly, yes.
You'd agree that John O'Keefe had a number of blunt impact injuries on his face, on his head, and his right arm.
Yes.
Besides his right arm, which we'll discuss in a second, taking his body from the neck down, he did not have any significant injuries.
From the neck down. Not significant, no.
Let's take those one at a time. No injury whatsoever to his shoulders.
Correct.
No injuries whatsoever to his chest area, aside from sort of the CPR-related injuries that you discussed.
Yes, correct.
And that was in the sternum, is that right?
It was in the ribs, just adjacent to the sternum, yes.
Okay. No injuries to his torso, other than that.
No.
No injuries to his back.
No.
No injuries to his hips.
Correct.
No injuries to his pelvis.
Correct.
No injuries to his thighs.
To his...
Thighs.
No.
No injuries to his knees.
Correct.
No injuries to his shins.
Correct.
No injuries to his ankles.
Correct.
No injuries to his feet.
Correct.
From the neck down, he did not have a single broken bone, again, aside from those CPR-related injuries you discussed, correct?
That's correct.
Not a single fracture.
Other than CPR, correct.
And you spoke earlier about how the bumper was a little higher than on, say, a regular sedan, correct?
Correct.
And so usually in a pedestrian collision, you would see injuries to the knees, is that right?
Objection.
I'll allow it.
Depending on the kind of car, depending on the speed, depending on the height of the individual and the car, you might see injuries to their lower extremity. Yeah.
But in this case, you didn't see any injuries to his thighs, to his pelvis, anything even at the height of the bumper, is that correct?
Correct. A very minor abrasion to the side of his right knee.
So surely you'd agree that John O'Keefe's injuries, or lack thereof, are inconsistent with having been struck by a 7,000-pound vehicle at 24 miles per hour and being projected 30 feet.
Objection.
Sustained. Break it down, ask it differently.
Would you agree that John O'Keefe's injuries, or lack thereof, are inconsistent with having been struck by a vehicle at 24 miles per hour?
I would say it's likely and unlikely at the same time, depending on the position of the body and the vehicle in question.
Well, let me give you a hypothetical. Let's say the person were standing with their arm like this, and they were struck by the rear taillight of a vehicle at 24 miles per hour. Would you agree that his injuries are inconsistent with that scenario?
Objection.
Sustained.
Maybe approach, Your Honor.
Sure.
Would you agree that John O'Keefe's injuries to his arm, let's start there, are inconsistent with having been struck by a vehicle at 24 miles per hour and then causing him to spin around and be projected 30 feet?
Okay, so you need to break it down.
Would you agree that John O'Keefe's injury to his arm are inconsistent with having been struck by a vehicle at 24 miles per hour?
I don't know. I am not a reconstruction expert. I'm not a biomechanics expert. I never personally inspected the car, so I can't offer an opinion on that.
You did examine John O'Keefe's arm, correct?
Yes.
You observed no significant bruising,
Correct.
no fractures,
Correct.
and no broken bones.
Correct.
I'd like to talk about the injuries to John O'Keefe's face. You testified that Mr. O'Keefe had a laceration on his right upper eyelid.
Correct.
You also described multiple abrasions on his nose.
2. Yes.
Although these injuries may not have been the ultimate cause of his death, you'd agree that less severe injuries can still be very important in interpreting the manner or the context in which that person died, correct?
Correct.
And in furtherance of that, you've been taught that when doing an autopsy, details matter,
Correct.
no matter how small.
Correct.
And that's one of the reasons as a medical examiner, you have to notate every single injury you find on a person. Is that
Correct.
right? If I could show you. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes. Show Mr. Lally.
Do you recognize that photograph?
I do.
And is that a photograph that was taken in connection with your autopsy?
Yes, it was taken at the time of autopsy after the face was cleaned.
Moved to admit.
I'm sorry, after what?
The face was cleaned up.
Okay.
I moved to admit, Your Honor.
Any objection, Mr. Lally?
No, Your Honor.
Okay.
Exhibit 650.
Permission to publish?
Yes.
Are these the facial injuries that you were testifying to earlier?
Yes.
And could you kind of describe in that photograph what injuries you observed to his face?
The orbital ecchymosis on both eyes, the small laceration to the right eyelid, the abrasions on the nose.
And you testified that the injuries to his face were also the result of a blunt force trauma.
Correct.
So that's the laceration to the eye and the 2 abrasions that we see there on his nose.
Correct.
And you agree that those injuries don't just manifest out of nowhere, right?
Absolutely.
They have to originate from something.
Yes.
Would you agree that his injuries to his face are consistent with having been punched?
That is a possibility.
You can take that down, Mr. Bates. Thank you. Your internal examination notes also cite a tongue laceration on the right front of the victim's tongue. Do you recall that?
Yes,
And you'd agree that a tongue laceration can be also caused by blunt force trauma.
correct.
And that could also include something like a punch to the victim's face or jaw.
That's a possibility.
In addition to the facial injuries, you described that Mr. O'Keefe had a significant laceration on the back of his head.
He had one laceration to the back of his head,
I
correct?
believe we saw a photograph of that
Yes.
a little bit earlier. You testified that the skin around the laceration on the back of his head was also scratched. Do you recall
Yes, I do.
that? But you did not testify as to how you opined that might have happened.
No,
Would you agree that someone could certainly get scratched on the back of their head if they were, for instance, dragged on the ground?
it's possible.
You described the open wound to the back of his head as a laceration, which is sort of a blunt force injury that's not the result of sharp force trauma. Is that right?
Yes,
And you'd agree that Mr. O'Keefe's head injury came from some sort of blow to the back of the head, whether it be an object or the ground. Is that right?
yes,
Objection.
And that injury could be the result of falling backward from a standing position onto concrete.
it's possible.
It could also be the result of being struck with a large object such as a baseball bat or a barbell.
It's possible.
In other words, it was an irregular laceration that resulted from some blunt force trauma.
Correct.
I'd like to sort of circle back to those injuries to Mr. O'Keefe's arm. You testified that there were, again, no fractures, no broken bones, no significant contusions.
Correct.
But you did describe the wounds to Mr. O'Keefe's arm as having discrete linear abrasions, which were caused by some sort of blunt object, correct?
Yes.
What does discrete mean?
It means each one is an individual injury as opposed to confluent, where it would be all meshed together.
Your Honor, if I could publish what's been previously marked as Exhibit 19.
Okay.
And these are sort of the linear wounds that you're referring to.
Yes,
And you testified that these also sort of appear in clusters or groups. You
Yes.
call them pattern abrasions, is that right?
yes, I did.
And you'd agree that, for example, road rash does not result in this type of discrete linear wounds.
It could, but not exactly like this.
Well, typically road rash covers sort of a large area of the skin. It would be a large abrasion. I mean, you've seen numerous cases of road rash in your
Yes.
career. And it doesn't look like that.
Correct.
Blunt force trauma can include injuries from various objects, as you testified, including an animal paw, correct?
Correct.
And you'd agree that these discrete linear abrasions are inconsistent with having been struck by a smooth rear tail light at 24 miles per hour.
Objection.
Can you answer that, Doctor?
I can't. By
Okay.
smooth, no.
All right, next question.
By a smooth rear tail light, you said that is not what you would see at 24 miles per hour, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
As you testified earlier, you've indicated that based on the facts that were presented to you, you don't know what caused those significant scratches on Mr. O'Keefe's right arm.
I do not.
May I approach, Your Honor? Sure.
If I could just see what was.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Lilly. Do you recognize that photograph?
I do. It's a photograph of Mr. O'Keefe's right hand.
May I mark that as the next in order?
Is there an objection?
May we approach?
Okay.
Dr. Permission to publish?
Well, we need to mark it first. So we'll mark it for identification, and then when it's appropriate, it will be transferred to being an exhibit.
Thank you.
But yes, you can publish. Is it all set to be published appropriately?
Yes, Your Honor.
The triple N for identification. Okay.
Dr. Scordivello, you indicated on direct examination that at least that one of the bruises from Mr. O'Keefe's right hand could potentially be attributed to an attempt to get IV fluid into the hand. Is that correct?
Correct.
During the course of your conducting your autopsy, you reviewed records from the Canton Fire Department and EMS, as well as Good Samaritan Hospital. Is that correct?
I did.
And do you recall reviewing records indicating that the IV fluids in this particular case were administered through the tibia and then later through a catheter at the hospital?
Yes, they were administered through intraosseous lines in both legs, shins, and at the hospital, they were administered through a femoral central line. Yes.
And you'd agree that bruising to the backs of hands is also consistent with defensive wounds.
Yes, that's correct.
And there are actually 4 separate distinct bruises outside of the one that you discussed earlier on Mr. O'Keefe's right hand, correct?
Yes, I would say 3, but I can see how you would say 4. 1, 2, 3. That might be 1 together. But yes, I can see how you would say 4.
And you testified yesterday that there was also an injury to Mr. O'Keefe's left hand.
There was a vague contusion on his left hand, correct?
You were asked by Mr. Lowry.
Can we take this down now, Ms. Biddle?
Yes, Your Honor. You testified on direct examination that you didn't see any sort of obvious signs of a fight because Mr. O'Keefe's fingernails were intact and you didn't observe any fractures on his hands. Is that right?
Correct.
But broken fingernails and fractured hands aren't the only observable signs of a fight. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
In fact, you noted a laceration over his eye.
Yes.
You noticed multiple lacerations on his nose.
Abrasions on his nose, yes. Yes,
Multiple abrasions on his nose.
correct.
You noticed a laceration to his tongue.
Yes,
You noted the contusions on the back of his right hand,
correct.
the contusion to his left hand as well.
Correct.
And as you just testified, bruising on the back of hands may be consistent with defensive wounds.
It could be.
So in fact, if you have a body that presents with a laceration to one of the brows, a laceration or abrasions to the nose, an egg over an eye, contusions and abrasions on the hands, and a laceration to the tongue, these injuries are consistent with a physical altercation, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
Are those injuries consistent with a physical altercation?
Objection.
Sustained.
Your Honor, may we approach?
Sure.
Shifting gears for a second, you indicated on direct examination that you reviewed some photographs from law enforcement that showed no footprints in the snow. Do you recall that testimony?
I do.
Were those provided to you by Trooper Proctor?
Yes.
Do you have those photographs with you?
No, I don't.
Do you recall what was depicted in those photographs?
Yes, if I remember correctly, it was the area of the fire hydrant and the area where Mr. O'Keefe's body was discovered. It's the front of the house, the area of the fire hydrant, and I believe the flagpole.
Thank you. You testified that Mr. O'Keefe had multiple fractures to his skull, but that they seemed to be originating from a single point of impact on the back of his head. Is that correct?
It appeared so, yes.
Are you reasonably certain that all of his injuries were the result of a single impact to the back of the head?
It could be a single impact.
But it also could be multiple impacts, correct?
It could be, yes.
Because as you just testified, Mr. O'Keefe suffered multiple injuries to the front of his face as well.
Correct.
In other words, he could have suffered a trauma to the face and then fallen and sustained the injury to the back of the head, correct?
That is possible, yes.
And you testified before the state grand jury that the areas of bruising to the brain were likely due to a fall. Is that correct?
Yes.
In your expert medical opinion, is it possible for someone to get punched in the face hard enough to lose consciousness and fall backward?
Objection.
I'll allow it.
It's possible.
If I can have one more.
Sure.
May I see the exhibits that were just marked, Your Honor? Your Honor, if I could have permission to publish what's been previously admitted as Exhibit 19.
Yes.
Dr. Squirty-Bell, it's kind of hard to see in this picture, but there's some redness that you observe on the body by the ribs that we observed in some of the other photographs that were presented by Mr. Lally.
Just one yard.
Yes.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'd like to show you what's been previously marked as People's Exhibit 648. Ms. Gilman, would it be, Mr. Bates, will you take that down? Ms. Gilman, would it be possible to display Exhibit 648? 648. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
It's 2853. Thank you. Dr. Squirty-Bell, you were shown this photograph by Mr. Lally on direct examination.
Yes.
Do you see the redness sort of next to his rib cage on the bottom? Correct.
Yes.
What is that?
That is liver.
Lividity?
Lividity, yes.
Can you describe to the jury what lividity is?
Yes, lividity is the pooling of blood to the dependent areas of the body after someone is deceased.
So even though it sort of appears to look like a bruise, that's lividity, correct?
That is lividity, yes. It goes all the way down.
And it's not the result of an injury.
No.
Thank you. No further questions.
Okay, the lights, please. Thank you. Mr. Lally?
Dr. Scorbell, you did observe a minor abrasion to Mr. O'Keefe's right knee, is that correct?
Correct.
And what part of the knee was that on, if you recall?
It was on the side, on the lateral side of his right knee.
And by lateral, sort of the side that faces away from the body, is that correct?
Correct.
You were asked whether or not the small injuries on Mr. O'Keefe's face could possibly be from a punch, is that correct?
Correct.
You said that's one of the possibilities, is that correct?
Yes.
What are some of the other possibilities?
Could be impact during a fall. It could be coming in contact with any blunt object in the snow.
Would glass be a possibility as far as a blunt object?
It could be under certain circumstances.
Piece of plastic under certain circumstances as far as a blunt object, would that be also a possibility?
Correct, yes.
Now, as far as the abrasion near the laceration on the back of Mr. O'Keefe's head, you were asking questions about whether or not that could be from dragging, correct?
Correct.
Now, as far as injuries or abrasions concerning dragging, would it be typical to see just one isolated abrasion in the area of a laceration?
Not typical, but possible.
Could that also be a result of the blunt impacts, or as one of the possibilities you testified before, from hitting the ground?
Yes.
Now, you were asked about hitting the ground, specifically hitting concrete. Would that impact injuries to the back of Mr. O'Keefe's head also be consistent with striking his head on frozen ground?
I'm sorry.
Objection.
I'll allow it.
Can you repeat the question?
You were asked a question on cross-examination about the laceration and abrasion to the back of Mr. O'Keefe's head being consistent with striking his head on concrete, correct?
Yes.
Would that also be consistent with striking his head on frozen ground?
Could be, yes.
You were asked about certain wounds as being a possibility of defensive wounds. What are some of the other types of defensive wounds that you would expect to see that you did not see in this case?
I would expect to see, or I have seen, multiple bruising to the, again, posterior aspects of the forearms. I have seen cuts, lacerations, depending on how a person might be defending themselves, the position of their arms.
And would that also include breaks in the fingernails and fractures to the hands?
Objection.
Watch the form, Mr. Lally. Sustained.
What, if anything else, would that include?
It might include bruising to the knuckles. It might include broken fingers.
Now, with reference to the injuries that you were asked about with respect to Mr. O'Keefe's right hand, would those also be consistent with impact from a blunt object as well?
They are blunt impact injuries, yes.
Now, again, if I could, just with reference to, you were asked about different possibilities with the skull fractures and bleeding in the brain. What is your opinion as to sort of how that was caused, and sort of, if you could again just go through your opinion as to the head injuries, the skull fracture, and the bleeding?
Objection.
Ask it again, Mr. Lally, in a different way.
You were asked about some possibilities. What is your opinion as to how those injuries were sustained or manifested in Mr. O'Keefe?
I don't know how they came to be. I described them, and I stated previously that they are consistent with a fall to the back of the head.
And so I'm sorry, Doctor. My question is more geared towards as far as the single impact to the back of the skull and then sort of radiating fractures in the skull. If you could explain that in reference to the subdural hemorrhage, subarachnoid hemorrhage, and the ecchymoses that you observed.
Again, a single impact with a fall could cause all the injuries that were seen in the brain and the skull.
Thank you. I know.
No further questions.
All right, doctor, you are all set. Thank you very much.
Can I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
Good morning, sir. In a good loud voice, would you state your name and spell your last name?
Sure, it's Brian Loughran. It's Loughran.
And where are you from, sir?
Mr. Lockman, I'm going to ask you to keep your voice up as loud as you can, sir.
Sorry,
That's okay.
Maybe put your mouth as close to the mic as you can. Where did you grow up, sir?
Canton, Mass.
Is that where you live?
Yes,
How long have you lived there?
both 35, 36 years.
And did you go to Canton public schools?
Yes,
Now, in the course of living in Canton, were you familiar with the Albert family?
yes,
Which members of the Albert family were you familiar with?
all of them.
And when you say all of them, can you name the ones that you were familiar with?
I was familiar with Brian,
Brian Albert?
Chris Albert, Brendan Albert, Kevin Albert, and I believe Kathy Albert is the sister, but I'm not 100% sure on her first name.
Okay, and those are the siblings that you had contact with and were familiar with?
Yes,
Did you know some better than others?
yes,
Whom did you know the best?
Chris Albert.
What is the age difference between you and Chris Albert?
I believe we're the same age.
Did you graduate high school with him?
He went to a different high school, but yes,
Graduated at the same time.
correct.
And with regard to your familiarity with Chris Albert, can you explain to the jury how you became familiar with him and what your relationship with him has been?
I went to school with him, elementary school. We went to middle school. Then he transferred to a Catholic school. Then later in the years, I began to work for Chris for D&E Pizza, delivering pizzas.
Okay. And approximately what ages were you when you were delivering pizzas for D&E Pizza and Chris Albert?
I was 25, 26 years old.
And how many years did you deliver pizzas for him?
Up until I got married, 35.
So several years.
8 years.
8 years, okay. And with regard to your interactions or knowledge of Kevin Albert, can you describe that?
Kevin Albert would be through D&E Pizza if he came in. Through the police department, would see him on details.
All right. And were you friendly with him?
Yes.
With regard to Brian Albert, could you describe your interactions or your relationship with him?
Again, through D&E Pizzas, delivering pizzas to his house. Cordial, polite, would say hello.
All right. So you're friendly with the Albert family?
Correct.
Now, back in January of 2022, where were you working?
I was working for the town of Canton.
In what department?
I was working in the sewer department.
Is that also called the water department?
Yes, water and sewer are combined.
And under what heading is that?
The
water-
DPW.
It's under the DPW, the Department of Public Works?
Correct.
Now, back in January of 2022, were you one of the regular snow plowers for the town of Canton?
Yes.
And directing your attention to January 28th of 2022, do you remember that day?
Yes.
What do you remember about that day, the 28th?
It was a potential blizzard. We had been given a start time.
All right. And when you say you had been given a start time, what does that mean?
It means that we're expected to be in our trucks at a certain time on our route.
Okay. And who gives those instructions back in January of 2022?
The supervisor for the Canton DPW,
And who was that at the time?
William Walsh.
Also known as Billy Walsh?
Yes.
Now, when were you called in to do plowing that evening or early morning?
We were told to be in by 2:30
And is that 2:30 a.m. or p.m.?
a.m.
Would that now be on January 29th?
Correct.
So what time did you arrive at the DPW that early morning?
About 2:15.
When you got there, what did you need to do in order to go out plowing?
I needed to get into my truck and get that prepared to go out.
All right. And your truck, is there one that's specifically assigned to you when you plow?
Yes.
And does that truck have any particular nickname?
Yes, it's called the Franken truck.
And why is it called the Franken truck?
It is a truck that has a lot of different parts than what it's required. It's not parts that were made for that specific truck.
An older one?
Yes, it was a truck that was very uncomfortable at the beginning to use, so they tried to make it as comfortable as possible.
All right. And that particular truck, is it used for anything else other than snow plowing?
Yes. It's used for everyday use.
Okay. Now, so you get to the DPW at 2:15, you say that you get your truck ready. What does that entail to get your truck ready, and how long does it take?
It takes about 5 minutes. We just basically we need to make sure it's got enough gas in it, so we're not going to the route and running out of diesel fuel, which is not good. It's just basically going over the truck, making sure you have everything you need for that night.
And do you plow alone or with someone?
By myself.
Now, with regard to the visibility in your snowplow Franken truck, can you describe that for the jury, what you can see? What you can't see?
So the Franken truck has an air ride suspensions, an air ride seat, so the seat is raised so I can see over the hood, and I can see about 5 feet on either side of the passenger side, driver's side.
And when you say 5 feet, are you talking straight out from the...
From the windshield straight out.
All right. And what, if any, lighting do you have on Franken truck?
We have marking lights. We have 2 plow lights that are situated at the corners of the trucks, and it's up high. Illuminates very well. It's very well seen.
Okay. And with the extra set of lighting that you just described, how far can you see off to the sides in front of you and directly in front of you?
Probably 5 feet on the sides.
Well, so you already testified to that, 5 feet straight out.
Yeah.
But what about the sides going forward?
It's hard to decide to put into words, but I can see a real long distance. The visibility is fine. It is extremely. If you gave me probably 5, 10 feet, 15 feet out, maybe even further.
Okay. And with regard to the lighting, how much light does that give off?
Enormous amounts. It's almost driving with a spotlight.
And with regard to the air ride seats, what action did you take with those that particular night?
I raised it so that the bottom of my knees would hit the steering wheel.
And what, if any, obstructions, I should say, were in front of you that would prevent you from seeing what's in front of you or to the side?
Nothing.
All right. Now, do you have a specific route assigned to you?
Yes, I do.
Could you describe that route? And by the way, that specific route, was that the one that you were assigned on January 29th?
Correct.
Could you describe that for the jury?
Yes, it's a route that consists of Cedar Crest from Kings Road to Chapman Street and everything in between. There are a lot of streets I could name if you would like, but Fairview is one, Spring Lane is one, Cedar Crest, Kings Road. Those are pretty important roads that I would consider major roads on my route.
All right. Now, that particular night, if you got there at 2:15, what time do you think you were on the road by in Frankenstruck?
I was on Cedar Crest about 2:30, 2:35.
Now, with regard to Cedar Crest, I would like to show you a map if I can. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I've handed you a document. If you could just review that to yourself and then look up at me when you're done. Do you recognize what's depicted on that?
Yes,
What is it?
it is my plow route and consisting of streets that I plow.
All right. And to be fair, that's a portion of your plow route, right?
Correct.
There are other areas of the city that you plow?
This actually depicts my actual physical route.
Oh, okay, great. And that's a fair and accurate representation of the streets as they existed back in January of 2022?
Yes.
I would offer that, Your Honor.
Any objection, Mr. Lally?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. 651. Thank you.
And can I have permission to publish before the jury?
Sure.
Okay. Now, you just testified that you got to Cedar Crest, I believe. You said 2:30 to 2:35 or so?
Correct.
All right, as we look at this exhibit on the screens, are you going from right to left or left to right on Cedar Crest when you first approach Fairview?
Right to left.
Okay, so you're going sort of from the upper right-hand corner of the diagram down Cedar Crest toward Fairview. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Can you take a laser pointer and just confirm that route for the jury? That's, okay. You see that's Fairview Road? Are you able to read that right?
I'm not, to be honest with you. I'm sorry.
Do you still have that map in front of you? Maybe that'll help you, Mr. Lally.
And actually, can I orient it so it's oriented just like that for him? That's how it's up on the screen.
Okay.
And by the way, I should have asked this, but is it in terms of is it you can't read the writing or you can't really see the outline of the streets?
Both.
Okay. Well, that's not going to help much. Okay. If we can have the lights back on. With the court's permission, can I leave that up on the screen while I ask a few more questions?
Sure, except this I can't see it.
Right. No, I know, but the jury can, so I think it would be helpful for them. All right. So you're coming down Cedar Crest, and would Fairview be on your left or your right when you first approach it?
When I first approach, it's on my left.
All right. Now, do you take that left at that time?
No, I do not.
Why not?
At the time, I'm pushing snow, and we don't want to block any part of the road with snow, and taking a left would have left a windrow of snow. So I proceed to the end of Cedar Crest, do a cul-de-sac, and then head back up Cedar Crest.
All right. So there's a cul-de-sac at the end of Cedar Crest.
Correct.
Dead end.
Yes.
And you plow that?
Yes.
All right. So then when you come back up, is Fairview on your right or your left?
It is on my right.
What do you do?
I take that right and continue to plow.
Now, are you familiar with the Albert residence on Fairview Road?
Yes.
How did you become familiar with that?
Growing up in Canton, I knew where they lived.
Can I have Exhibit 66 displayed with the court's permission?
Yes.
From where you're seated now, Mr. Walker, are you able to see what's on the screen?
Yes.
And do you recognize that?
Yes.
What do you recognize that to be?
That is the Albert house, Brian Albert's.
And when you were passing the Albert home on Fairview, the very first time you passed it, would it have been on your right or your left?
It would have been on my right.
What section of the road were you plowing at that point?
The middle of the road.
Why is that?
I start in the middle and I angle right with the plow.
Now, I want to direct your attention to when you were, your truck was essentially perpendicular to the driveway. You see the driveway in Exhibit 66?
Yes, I do.
When you were perpendicular to the driveway, where were your headlights pointed?
In front of me. In front of the truck.
I'm sorry?
In front of the truck.
And what were you able to see of the front lawn of the Albert residence that very first time you passed?
I was able to see the entire front lawn.
And about what time was it that you first passed 34 Fairview Road?
About 2:45.
Now, as you continued along past the driveway, did you continue to have all of those headlights on in front of you?
Yes.
And as you continued along, what were you able to see of that front lawn? How much of it?
A very large portion, almost to the front steps.
And now, when you're plowing, where is your attention focused, sir?
My attention's focused in front of me and then to the sides.
Why would your attention be focused to the sides?
I am trying to be aware of any side traffic any pedestrians, and God forbid, any animals.
And when you were passing the Albert residence, as you pass every home, what attention do you pay to the sides of the road and the lawns that are adjacent to the road?
I'm, again, making sure that there are no animals, no pedestrians, and making sure no one's coming out of their driveways, not expecting to see me.
And with regard to Exhibit 66, do you see the flagpole there?
Yes,
Is that something you had seen previously?
yes.
And when you made that first pass by that residence at 2:45 in the morning, sir, with your headlights on, what, if anything, did you see on the front lawn in the area of the flagpole?
I saw nothing.
If there had been a 6'2", 200-pound man lying in the snow there, would you have seen it?
Objection.
Sustained.
Now, once you pass the residence, where do you go?
I go to the end of Fairview.
And what street does that intersect with?
That intersects with Chapman Street.
If we have the previous exhibit, put back up with the court's permission. Sure. Okay. Do you still have the exhibit oriented the same way, sir?
I do.
Where's Chapman Street on the exhibit? Down the bottom, the top, or which side?
Down the bottom.
Okay. And when you come to the end of Fairview with Cedar Crest in your rear now, right?
Correct.
Do you take a left or a right on Chapman?
I take a left
All right.
onto
And
Chapman.
Once you take that left, what do you do?
I back up and then take a left to go back down Fairview.
Okay. So you're essentially doing almost a three-point turn in the road?
Correct.
All right. So now, do you go back down Fairview at that time?
Yes, I do.
And how far do you go down Fairview?
To the end, to Cedar Crest.
Now, at this point in time, you would also pass the Albert residence, correct?
Correct.
Would it be on your right or your left?
On my left.
Were you looking to the right and the left as you were coming down?
Yes.
How much light did your headlights illuminate of the Albert's front lawn as you were coming down from Chapman Street?
Coming down Chapman, just about the entire front lawn.
And again, with regard to that area around the flagpole, did you see anything on the lawn?
Nothing.
See a body?
No.
All right. Now, after you've done these two passes, sir, where do you go?
I then take a right on the Cedar Crest. I proceed up Spring Lane, come down Spring Lane, and then do the remaining of my route.
All right. How long did it take you before you wound up back at Cedar Crest and Fairview?
About 45 minutes.
So I think you had previously testified you made the first pass around 2:45?
Correct.
So would that put us at about 3:30 when you're about to make the second pass?
Objection.
Sustained, ask it different.
Sure, I'm sorry. What time was it, to your best estimate, in terms of when you would have approached Fairview and Cedar Crest again?
3:15 to 3:30.
All right. Now, when you approach that intersection again, are you approaching it such that Fairview would be on your left or your right this time?
On my left.
Same as last time.
Correct.
What do you do when you approach Cedar Crest? I'm sorry, when you approach Fairview and it's on your left?
At that point, I have an option. I can go to the end of Cedar Crest, or I can turn around at a street, depending on how much snow I have on Fairview.
And with regard to the decision you made regarding that choice, what decision did you make on January 29th at 3:30?
Went all the way to the end.
Went all the way to the end of Cedar Crest?
Correct.
Same thing you did the first time?
Correct.
And then you come back up?
Correct.
Is Fairview on your right or your left at that time?
It would be on my right.
And did you take that right?
Yes, I did.
What, if anything, unusual did you see at that time?
At that point, I saw a Ford Edge on the side of the road,
Where was it parked on the side of the road?
in front of the Albert's house,
Where in front of the Albert's house?
by the flagpole.
And why was that unusual?
The Alberts never had cars that were parked out front, and it just stuck out as weird.
Now, what were the snow conditions like at that point? This is now, I think you said about 3:15 to 3:30.
It's starting to accumulate a lot quicker than what it was previous.
And what policies does the DPW have regarding cars parked in the street during a blizzard where there's plowing to be done?
We are to notify the supervisor. At that point, he will make a phone call to the police, and depending on if they can have the resident move it, it gets moved. If not, it gets towed.
And with regard to that policy, did you comply with that policy in those early morning hours?
No, I did not,
Why?
because I was being courteous to the Albert family.
Now, once you saw the Ford Edge parked on the side of the road near that flagpole, what did you do?
I had to go around the vehicle, and as to not hit the vehicle.
All right, and probably obvious, but as you're approaching the vehicle, was it faced in the same direction that you were traveling?
Yes,
And so you're going around to the left or the right of the vehicle?
left.
And once, as you were approaching that vehicle, were you able to see on the right side of that vehicle, the lawn side?
Yes.
Did you see anything on the front lawn at that time?
Objection.
I'll allow it. Did you see anything?
No.
The lights were still on.
Correct.
All right, now, once you passed the vehicle, did anything attract your attention at all?
No.
All right, where do you go?
I go up to the end of Fairview and do the same process. Take a left on Chapman, and back down Chapman, and take a left into Fairview again.
Once you come back down Fairview, do you pass the Albert residence again?
Correct.
Was there that car that you saw?
Correct.
It moved from when you passed it the first time.
No.
Were you able to see the front lawn of the Alberts in front of you? As you were coming down Fairview toward Cedar Crest?
Not as much as the first time because the car blocked the view.
All right. Now, after that, how long did it take you before you came back to that area to plow again?
About 3 hours.
Do you recall about what time it was that you wound up back on Fairview?
I don't honestly recall what specific time.
Sure. Approximately, if it was 3:15 to 3:30, that second time, what would be your best estimate of the time when you came back?
I would say if I had to say, it would have been 5:30 up Fairview, and came back down, and then at that point I wasn't able to go further than Carriage Lane.
Okay, and when you say that you went up Fairview and came back down, you initially went from which side of Fairview?
Right side.
What would that be, the right side? I'm sorry. Would it be the Cedar Crest side or the...
It would have been Cedar Crest side.
Coming from Cedar Crest, and then you went up Fairview, came back down?
Came back down. As I'm going up, I am actually seeing first responders. And at that point, as I'm coming back down, the road's blocked at that point.
Okay. And when the road was blocked, what, if any, plowing were you able to do after that on Fairview?
I was able to go as far as Carriage Lane and then turn around.
Okay. And then I imagine it was several hours before you could plow again?
Before I could plow Fairview to the end of Cedar Crest, yes.
All right. Now, I'd like to direct your attention to February 15th of 2022. We were approached by an investigator who wanted to ask you questions about what you had seen and done on January 29th of 2022. Do
Yes.
you remember his name?
Yes.
What is it?
Paul?
And what was your understanding about whom Paul worked for?
Objection.
Ask it differently.
On February 15th of 2022, were you ever approached by anybody in law enforcement, sir?
No.
So what was your understanding of Paul's job?
Objection.
I'll see Councilor Tybar.
Just a couple questions, Mr. Lockram.
Sure.
At any point in 2022, were you ever approached by any police investigators, sir?
No.
When was the first time that you were approached by the state police in this case? Do you recall?
I don't recall the actual date, but I do know.
Year?
Yes.
What year was that?
2023.
And do you recall the name of the investigator that approached you?
Mike Proctor and Sergeant, and I can't pronounce his name. I don't want to.
If I said Buchanan, would that ring a bell?
Yes, it is.
I have nothing further. Thanks, sir.
Okay, Mr. Lally?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
May I approach?
Yes.
Sir, I'm showing you a document that's already been marked with Exhibit 109. Just ask you to look at that and look up whenever you're finished, okay?
Yes.
You recognize that, sir?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
These are the plow routes for the town of Canton.
And there's different numbers that are associated with different routes and different drivers assigned to those routes, is that right?
Yes.
And if you look down at number 11, is that your route that you were talking about as far as the sort of portion of Cedar Crest neighborhood that you plow?
Yes.
And that's the route that you were assigned to on January 28th and January 29th of 2022, correct?
Yes.
Now, if I could ask, just as far as there's a certain way that you plow a route.
Yeah.
Excuse me. There's a certain way that you plow a road, correct?
Correct.
And when you're first plowing the road, you're sort of plowing the middle of the road, correct?
Correct.
And you do it in sort of a fashion that's referred to as ring road right, is that correct?
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury what that is and sort of why you're plowing a road in that particular fashion when you're first starting to get out there with the plow?
So ring road to the right refers to the snow coming off the plow. It actually leaves a row of snow. We ring road to the right to prevent cars from having to go through the ring road to the left. If you go to the left, you've now put the ring road in the middle of the left-hand lane. So everything's to the right.
So everything's to the right because if there was a vehicle coming the other way, you'd be plowing into that vehicle, is that correct?
Correct.
And your goal, sort of, when you're first getting out there to plow the roads is to sort of clear the middle of the roadway first, correct?
Correct.
So that's where your truck is when you first go out and plow the road, is you're sort of in the middle of the road near the double yellow line if there is one on that road?
Correct.
Okay. Now, this truck that you were driving on that day, how long have you been assigned to that truck for plowing purposes?
I was assigned to that truck for probably 2 years, maybe longer.
Maybe longer. Were you driving that same truck in 2015?
No,
No? Okay, so you were driving a different truck at that point? Do
correct.
you remember what kind of truck that was?
It was an F550 utility truck, pickup truck.
Similar in size or shape to the truck that you were driving that day?
No,
Now, you were asked some questions about February 15th, 2022, when you spoke to some investigator on that day, correct?
February 15th?
Yes, 2022. That Paul person you were talking
Yes,
about? Okay. And you met him at a skating rink, is that right?
correct.
And you said in a statement to him at that time that you would have seen a body on the front lawn or the sidewalk, is that right?
Correct.
Now, are you aware that there is no sidewalk on the same side of the street as 34 Fairview Road?
Correct.
Now, you mentioned some familiarity with the Alberts and with the Albert resident. Are there other people on that route that you're familiar with as far as where they live and who they are and all that?
Yes,
And how are you equally familiar with them, more familiar with them, or less familiar with them?
equally.
Equally? Now, familiarity with 34 Fairview Road, does that extend to sort of the lighting around that area?
No,
So do you know that there is actually no street lighting whatsoever in the area of the fire hydrant, the flagpole, or anywhere there for several hundred feet?
correct.
So you do know.
Yeah, I believe so, yes.
And so when you're driving by, you're looking for cars coming out of the driveway, cars coming in the opposite direction, people walking, is that correct?
Correct.
And you're trying to look for those objects so that you make sure that you don't strike them or hit them or anything like that, correct?
Correct.
And on February 15th, 2022, when you had this meeting with Paul, you told him about 3:30 or 4 a.m. Is when you saw this Ford Edge on Cedarbridge, correct?
Correct.
Now, in fact, when you first spoke to this individual named Paul, you didn't tell him it was a Ford Edge, correct?
Nope, told him it was a Ford Edge.
You didn't tell him first that it was a small SUV?
Nope, told him it was a Ford Edge.
Do you remember at any time Paul taking you on the parking lot and showing you different vehicles and asking you if those vehicles matched what vehicle you saw?
No, he wanted to make sure that what I was telling him was accurate. So he showed me what was a Ford Edge, but I had already told him it was a Ford Edge.
So he brought you out to the parking lot at the skating rink that you were meeting at, specifically showed you a Ford Edge and asked you if that was a vehicle.
Correct.
Now, do you know sort of the difference between, if you were to see a Ford Edge at nighttime in a snowstorm, the difference between a Ford Edge and a Jeep Cherokee?
Yes,
What's the difference?
the taillights in the back.
What about it?
Ford Edges are more round. The whole back facade is a little bit more round. The Jeep Cherokee are more square.
Now, what color was this SUV that you saw?
I can't tell you that. I am colorblind.
Can you tell, I'm just curious, sir, as far as your colorblindness, can you tell whether or not an object is dark or light just by looking at it? Or you can't tell at all?
I can see things that are light. I can see things that are dark. I can see true colors. I can't see shades of true colors.
And so from what you saw, was this light or dark?
Light.
Now, you told this Paul individual on February 15th that the SUV that you saw was exactly where Mr. O'Keefe's body was found, correct?
Correct.
How do you know where his body was found?
I told him specifically if he was looking at the door, the front door, it was about 3 feet to the left of the door. And with
To the left of the door?
looking at the front of the door to the left of the door, pushing it up Fairview.
So if he wrote in his report that you told him that the vehicle was exactly where the body was found, that would not be true?
Objection.
No, I'll allow that.
Could you repeat that question, please?
If he wrote in his report that you told him that the SUV was exactly where the body was found, that would not be true, would it not?
That would be true. The car was to the left of the door, putting it in front of the flagpole.
My question for you, sir, is how do you know where Mr. O'Keefe's body was found? At any point in time, did you see Mr. O'Keefe's body on the front lawn?
No.
So how do you know where Mr. O'Keefe's body was found?
Through police reports, police interviews, stuff that was posted on the media.
So you've seen police reports in the media?
Well, not the
correct?
police reports, I'm sorry, but what was said during on the news.
So what you've heard on the news, not necessarily what you saw or what you know yourself, correct?
Could you repeat that question, please?
You're recounting sort of what you've heard or saw on the news, and so this doesn't come from your personal knowledge or anything about where Mr. O'Keefe was, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, you also spoke with some other individuals in May of 2023, correct?
Correct.
Now, did you tell those individuals that you actually came in, and when you say came in, you come into sort of the main sort of hub or the shed on Boulevard Street, correct?
Correct. We punch in.
That's where you punch in and you pick up your truck and you sort of do your checkpoint around the truck and then you go out and plow.
Correct.
Now, you were plowing on this street. Was there any other sort of subcontractor or anything else that was working plowing the roads as well?
Yes.
And who was that?
It was by the yard landscaping.
And so they assist as far as the plow route is concerned, and they go around and they plow things on the same route that you were describing, correct?
Correct.
Now, these other people that you talked to in May of 2023, did you tell them at that time that you actually came in around 11:30 p.m. to 12 a.m.?
I don't remember that.
You don't remember that, or you didn't tell them?
I don't remember that.
So that would be a significant difference, 11:30 p.m. to 12 a.m. from 2:15 a.m. to 2:30 a.m., correct?
Correct.
Now, you also indicated to them at that time that you went past Fairview at approximately 12 a.m. and 2 a.m., correct?
I never did 12. but it was definitely 2:30,
So if they wrote
2:40,
that in a report, that would
2:35.
be inaccurate as well, correct?
Sustained, and only one person can talk at a time.
I apologize. I'm sorry, sir. Please continue and finish your answer.
I didn't hear the question.
Okay. Well, let me ask it again. So as far as if that was contained within a report regarding that conversation in May of 2023, that you went past Fairview Road or went down Fairview Road at 12 a.m. and 2 a.m., that would not be accurate, correct?
Objection.
Sustained, ask it differently.
Did you go down Fairview Road at 12 a.m. and 2 a.m.?
No.
If that were contained in a report of your conversation you had in May of 2023, would that be accurate?
Objection.
Sustained, ask it differently, Mr. Riley.
Now, as far as that conversation that you had in May of 2023, did you tell those individuals that you saw the vehicle around 1:30 or 2 in the morning?
Again, I don't remember ever saying that.
Is that accurate as far as whether or not you told them that?
Again, I don't remember saying that.
Did you see a vehicle around 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning?
I wasn't on the road at 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the morning.
Correct. Now, do you also recall telling those individuals that Fairview Road was blocked off by cruisers at about 3 or 3:30 in the morning?
Again, that would have been incorrect.
Do you recall saying that in May of 2023?
I do not.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes. Show counsel. Thank you.
Sir, I'm going to ask you to read, showing you a document, I'm going to ask you to read this paragraph, and this paragraph to yourself, okay? And then whenever you're done, just read forward, right? Are you finished, sir?
Yes.
May I approach this retrieval?
Yes.
Thanks. Mr. Larkin, after having reviewed that as your memory refreshed as to that conversation you had in May of 2023,
No, it does not.
do you still, after reading that, don't recall telling anybody in May of 2023 that you came in around 11:30 p.m., 12 a.m. on the 28th, 29th?
I never came in at 11:30, 12:30 at night. It was 2:30 calling.
You don't recall indicating to anyone in May of 2023 that you went past Fairview at 12 a.m. and 2 a.m.?
Correct, never did.
And you don't recall telling anyone that you saw the car around 1:30 or 2 a.m.? Is that correct?
Correct.
And you don't recall telling anybody that the part of Fairview containing 34 Fairview was blocked off at 3 or 3:30 a.m., correct?
Correct.
Now, if the part of Fairview that you were talking about, so you didn't say that in May of 2023, because at 3 or 3:30, the roadway wasn't blocked off, correct?
Correct.
It was blocked off sometime around 6 a.m., correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so if you had said that the roadway was blocked off at 3 or 3:30 in the morning, and it was actually 6, then when you saw the vehicle, it would have been off a little bit as well, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
Seeing the car at 1:32 in the morning, with the road being blocked off at 3 or 3:30 in the morning, if the road's blocked off at 6 a.m., then that actually would have been, you saw a car sometime around 5 a.m., correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
Sure you didn't see a black Lexus SUV in front of the house at 34 Fairview Road around 5 a.m.?
No.
Now, you also were asked some questions and you spoke to some troopers in August of 2023, correct?
Correct.
And County Canton, they have a parking ban in Canton, is that correct?
Correct.
That goes from November until April?
Correct.
Now, part of your plow route is a road called Tippy Cart, correct?
Correct.
Where is Tippy Cart in relation to Fairview?
It is on top of the, it's on the right side of Cedar Crest. It would put it 2 streets up before Fairview.
And at some point, when you were plowing on Tippy Cart that night, you actually hit a basketball hoop, is that right?
Yes.
And did you call that in?
Yes.
And as a result of that, what happened with the basketball hoop after that?
Nothing. The point was to make sure I was covered, basically. That's why I notified my supervisor that I hit the basketball hoop.
And about what time was that you hit the basketball hoop?
I don't recall.
Is it closer to when you started, closer to when you ended?
I don't recall. I don't recall what time.
So you don't recall anything specific about that time frame, correct?
No, just that I know I hit the basketball net.
And obviously, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth or anything, sir, but you didn't intentionally hit the basketball hoop, correct?
Correct.
So you hit it because you didn't see it, correct?
No, I was attempting to avoid the net by going around it. And the machine had a different size body than what it originally had. And I underestimated when I was going around that I need to be wider.
So you misjudged the distance, is that fair to say?
Yes.
May we approach, Your Honor?
Okay.
Now, sir, at some point prior to coming in here and testifying today, have you met with Mr. Yannetti?
Yes,
How many times?
twice.
And when were those times?
Tuesday and Saturday.
Tuesday and Saturday. When, sir?
Tuesday of last week, Saturday of last week.
And this Paul person that you spoke of before, was that person present there as well?
Yes,
And did you make note of Paul writing anything down, or Mr. Yannetti writing anything down while you were talking to them?
no,
And as far as you're aware, there's no reports that were generated from any of those conversations or any of those meetings. Is that correct?
correct.
So, sir, I'm correct if I say that you're sure about every time that you went down Fairview Road and everything that you saw going down Fairview Road, but you're completely unaware of the time that you ran into and struck a basketball hoop that night. Is that correct?
Objection.
Sustained. You can ask it differently.
You're sure about all the times that you went down Fairview Road?
Yes,
And you have no idea what time that you went on tippy cart and you struck a basketball hoop. Is that right?
if you ask me to guess, I can guess for you.
I'm not asking you to guess, sir. I'm asking you
I don't recall exactly what time I hit that net.
Nothing further.
All right. Anything, Mr. Yannetti?
Briefly, there's just one question I want to make sure that we understand what's going on.
So no statements, right? Just ask a question.
I always do that. I apologize, Your
Okay.
Honor. You were asked the question by Mr. Lally, are you sure you didn't see a black Lexus at around 5 a.m. in front of Fairview? And your answer was no. And my question to you is, does that mean that you're not sure if you saw one or that you didn't see one?
Objection.
I'll allow that.
I did not see a Lexus at 5 a.m.
At any point that night while you were plowing,
No,
did you see a black Lexus in front of 34 Fairview?
no,
Thank you, sir.
Very briefly, based on your timeline, were you on Fairview Road at 5 a.m.?
yes.
How so, sir?
It was about 3 hours after the last time I went on it. So it put me, I was last on it at about 3:45, about 5:30.
You were on the road about 2:45 and said it took you about 45 minutes to sort of do the loop and come back, correct?
Correct.
And from the time that you were on there, including the time that it took you to plow and the time that it took you to do all of those things along the route, you're coming back to Fairview Road at 45 minutes later, or it took you 45 minutes to do the route?
It was about 45 minutes.
And so from there, 45 minutes from what time are we talking that you were first there? Is that about 2:45 or so?
About 3:30. With some,
3:30. Okay, so about 3 hours after that would then be about 6:30, correct?
It was about. I mean, I know I went up there and saw the first responders coming down, and when
What I'm asking is, you would testify that you may, or you were on Fairview Road around 5 a.m. If you're not returning for 3 hours later, and that's about 6:30 from 3:30, correct?
correct,
So then you were not on Fairview Road at 5 a.m., correct?
I was. The time that it took me to do what I needed to do put me there about 5. So when I'm coming down Cedar Crest from doing my route, I am constantly looking at Fairview to make sure that it's considered a main road. So we need to take that as a priority. So if there's a lot of snow on that road, I'm going to go turn around and do the road so that the road is available. So first responders have access to that road.
So, sir, what I'm saying is, you testified, your timeline, that you came down there around 6:30 in the morning, correct?
My timeline was 5:30.
The 3 hours
5:30?
after 3:30.
It was 45 minutes.
45 minutes was from 2:45 to get you to 3:30. Then 3 hours later, it's 6:30, correct?
It was about 45 minutes because I didn't get a lot of time. At that time, the snow was coming down at a significant rate, and I needed to make sure Fairview was kept clear. So I come down and I check. So I have the streets are all around Fairview. They're 5-10 minutes around Fairview. So the furthest street from Fairview is Kings Road.
So my question is, sir, are you talking about coming down Fairview, or are you talking about being on another road and looking at Fairview?
Coming down Cedar Crest, looking at Fairview.
Despite that timeline that you gave her.
I am always looking at that street.
Nothing further.
All right, Mr. Lochran, you are all set, sir.
Thank you.
Your Honor, Dr. Russell, could you please, in a loud, clear voice, state your name and spell your last name for us?
Hi, Dr. Marie Russell, Russell.
Doctor, what do you do for a living?
I'm an emergency room forensic pathologist, just recently retired.
And prior to your retirement, what was your position?
The immediate position before retirement was chief medical executive at for the state of California at the Corcoran State Prison.
So, Dr. Russell, I'm going to ask you to keep your voice up, okay?
Yes.
Thank you.
There's a couple of air conditioners in here. Just keep your voice as loud as possible. What is, in fact, an emergency physician?
An emergency physician is a medical specialist who has completed a internship residency in the field of emergency medicine, which is a field which involves taking care of patients that are sick or injured and go to the emergency room.
Can you tell us what your education, starting with your education, training, and background is that qualifies you as an emergency physician, starting with your education all the way back to college?
Okay. Well, I've completed at least 16 years of formal education beyond high school, which includes college and then 4 years of medical school.
then 4 years of emergency medicine residency and internship, and then 4 years of pathology residency, which includes 2 years of anatomic and 2 years of forensic pathology. And then I treated, I've taken a bunch of other courses and attended seminars.
Let's start with your college. Where'd you go to college? Where'd you start?
Okay. MIT, I did my first year at MIT where I took my pre-med courses.
And then what happened after that? By the way, about what year was that?
Oh, that was in 1972 to 73.
Where did you go after MIT?
So what happened? I was interested in becoming a doctor, and so I took the pre-med courses, and then subsequent to that first year, I learned that my mother had metastatic breast cancer, and so I decided to go home to New York to be with her. After that, she subsequently passed away, and I returned to Massachusetts and decided to take advantage of the time off from school to investigate my interest in law enforcement, and I subsequently became a police officer here in Massachusetts.
So following MIT, did you go to a police academy?
I did.
Which police academy did you go to?
I went to the Boston Police Academy.
And did you end up becoming a sworn officer?
Yes.
For how long?
I did it for 7 years full time.
And what department did you work for?
I worked for the City of Malden Police Department.
What years was that, if you could give me a range?
From 1977 to 1984.
During the time that you were a Malden police officer, did you also go to school and continue your formal education?
I did.
Describe that for us, please.
Well, I took specialized courses through the Massachusetts Criminal Justice Training Council.
Objection, move to strike.
All right, so I'm going to strike that. Jurors, disregard that.
Let me ask you this way. I don't want to get into the specifics.
Okay.
While you were a police officer, did you also take formal education to further your medical training or your college?
Yes, I did.
That's what I'm interested in.
Okay.
Tell us about that.
Oh, yeah. So I attended Northeastern University part-time and received a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology.
After you got your degree in psychology from Northeastern, did you go on to continue your education in medicine?
I did. I attended medical school at the University of Massachusetts Medical School from 1983 to 1987.
Also known as UMass?
Yes.
Did you ultimately end up with a medical degree?
I did.
After you became a doctor, did you engage in a residency?
Yes.
What years were the residency, that first residency?
So the first residency was from 1987 to 1991, and that was in Los Angeles at the Los Angeles County University of Southern California Medical Center.
Is that also known as LAUSC?
It was at the time, yes.
And that's associated with the University of Southern California Medical Center, is that right?
Yes.
After your first residency, by the way, what was your first residency in? What was the subspecialty?
So it was in emergency medicine, and USC is a very large trauma center.
How would you describe the size and volume of the USC Trauma Center?
Well, it's one of the busiest in the United States.
After your first residency in emergency medicine, did you do a second residency?
Yes.
What was the subspecialty in that second residency?
So I did 2 years in anatomic pathology and 2 years as a fellow in forensic pathology at the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office.
So you did 2 full residencies after you became a doctor, is that right?
That is correct.
What's the difference? I don't want to go into great detail, but what's the difference between an emergency physician and, for instance, the residency that you did in pathology, both anatomic pathology and forensic pathology? What are the differences?
Well, generally, the emergency physician treats live patients, and the spectrum of injuries can be wide, or illnesses can be wide, and the forensic pathologist treats or deals with deceased patients generally.
Did you become a fellow at the LA Coroner's Office following your second residency?
No, that was part of the second residency.
Understood. Describe that fellowship.
So that was 2 years of full-time work at the LA Coroner's Office under the supervision of very experienced medical examiners. And what I did was I did autopsies, every day, 1 or 2 autopsies every day, attended conferences, and read journal articles, etc. It was a very formalized education.
Did you also become, at some point, a professor or an assistant professor at LAUSC, the medical center side, the university side?
Yes. So while I was doing the forensic pathology and anatomic pathology residencies during the daytime, I worked as a full-time ER doc supervisor in the capacity of an assistant professor in the evenings.
Did you also become an adjunct professor at Cal State Los Angeles, California State Los Angeles?
Yes.
Is that a separate university?
Yes.
And you had separate responsibilities as a professor in that role?
Yes.
Were you also teaching legal medicine and forensic medicine in that capacity?
That is correct. It was a master's level program.
How long were you an ER physician in total and an attending physician for Los Angeles County USC Medical Center?
29 years in total. 4 of those were in training, and the rest were as a supervisor. And
Of your 29 years, 25 of your 29 years, you were supervising others?
correct.
Meaning other doctors?
Other doctors, yes.
Teaching other doctors?
Yes.
And teaching medical students?
Yes, and seeing their cases. Once they examined the patient, they would present their case or tell me about the case, and then I would go in and see those patients in addition to my patients.
That was my next question, doctor. In addition to teaching, were you also specifically assessing, diagnosing, and treating patients of your own?
Yes, not not all the time. Some shifts I didn't have to do that, but much of the time, yes.
For the bulk of the 29 years that you were an ER doc, an emergency physician, in other words, were you also attending to patients as well?
Yes.
All right. Once you left that fellowship with the LA Coroner's Office, did you remain active in any way or connected to the Los Angeles Coroner's Office?
Yes, so I would attend their weekly conferences when I could, when I was available to do so, and I also consulted on some cases with them. So if they had something that was interesting and beyond their clinical expertise, they would sometimes consult me.
During your tenure at LAUSC, did you become the director of any of their sub-programs?
Yes.
Can you describe that for the viewers, please?
Yes, I was a director of the USC Center for Life Support Training, and that involved teaching other doctors life support courses such as advanced cardiac life support, or we teach the surgeons advanced trauma life support.
I'm sorry?
Well, go ahead.
Were you also a director for their quality improvement in the early 2000s?
Yes, for the emergency medicine department.
What was the reason for the quality improvement program, if you will, for LAUSC?
Well, for any program, it's ideal to have a quality improvement component, because what you want to do is look at cases that were treated and see if there were any errors, and if so, correct the errors, teach the doctors that involved, what went wrong, and try to make systemic improvements or teaching improvements to prevent those errors from occurring in the future.
Were you teaching basically best practices for emergency room physicians as well as trauma physicians and surgeons?
Yes, we tried.
And you were the director of that program, correct?
Yes.
Did you also become the director of LAUSC Jail Medical Services?
Yes.
What is the connection or the tether between the jail system in Los Angeles and LAUSC Medical Center?
Well, LAC Jail Ward was established about 70 years ago, and it was a place that the officers from various agencies, such as LA Sheriff's, LAPD, California Highway Patrol, or any of the municipalities around, could bring people that they arrested who were in need of medical care.
So the jail system, very large jail system, I'm guessing, in Los Angeles, correct?
Correct, yes.
There have to be medical attendants to that jail system, correct? Yes. And you became the director of the jail medical services for the entirety of that system?
For the hospital component of it.
Understood. In California, you're obviously licensed in California.
Yes.
There is a state medical board in California, correct?
Yes.
And did you ever do any work with that state medical board?
Yes, I worked with them for about 7 years part-time as a regular employee embedded in their enforcement unit. And what that involved was examining cases that were referred to the medical board because of substandard care or illegal activities of the providers. It was for physicians and physician assistants that we regulated.
What was your title with the state medical board for those purposes?
The title was medical consultant. That was the official title.
Okay. And then before your retirement, by the way, what years were you the medical consultant for, or a medical consultant for the state board in California?
Oh, gee, I think from 2009 to 2016. I think those were the years. I'm not positive.
All right.
I did that. That was a job I was doing when I was doing the LA County USC Medical Center job too. It was an extra job.
So you didn't stop working as a physician, an emergency physician at LAUSC to take that position?
No.
You just consulted with them?
I did it once a week, 1 day a week.
Got it. And then with regard to one of your last positions that you held, did you become the chief medical executive for the California State Prison Courtroom?
Yes.
Tell me about that position and the years that you held that position.
So that was from 2018 to 2023. And as the chief medical executive, I was the supervisor of all the doctors and nurse practitioners that provided care to the inmates.
And obviously the California prison system is a very large prison system.
Very.
Doctor, are you board certified in emergency medicine?
Yes.
Are you a member of the National Association of Medical Examiners?
Yes, I'm actually fellow status, which is higher than member.
Are you a member of the American Academy of Forensic Science?
Yes, again, I'm a fellow there.
Which also is an advancement above just being a member?
Correct.
Have you ever published in the area, and now I'm going to get very specific, have you ever published peer-reviewed articles and done research in the area of animal bites and scratches?
Yes.
Did you author or co-author a peer-reviewed article named Managing Law Enforcement Dog Bites in the ER?
Yes.
About what year was that?
It was in the 1990s.
Late 1990s, 1996, does that
Yes.
sound right? Did you also author or co-author an article called Law Enforcement Canine Dog Bites, Injuries, Complications, and Trends?
Yes.
So given those articles, did you study specifically dog bites, dog wounds on the human body?
Yes, I have a very strong interest in wounds in general, and I have a strong interest in dog bites in particular.
During the course of your career, your professional experience, how many patients would you say you've seen or treated with animal injuries, including bites and scratches?
It's very hard to estimate, but between my own practice and the residents that I supervised, it was, I'm sure, well over 500, and could possibly be double that.
Could be as many as 1,000.
It could be, yes.
Have you qualified as an expert in emergency medicine in the past?
Yes.
You qualified as an expert in the area of forensic pathology and wounds in the past?
Yes.
Is that both in federal and state courts?
Yes.
Doctor, were you asked to review certain materials related to this case in furtherance of coming to some opinions and conclusions about injuries suffered by John O'Keefe specific to his right arm?
Yes.
What did you review in coming to your opinions and conclusions?
Well, I reviewed hospital records and pictures taken of him in the hospital, when he was in the hospital. I reviewed autopsy records, the autopsy report, and photographs taken during and before the autopsy. I reviewed, let's see, I reviewed reviewed the grand jury testimony of the autopsy pathologist. I reviewed affidavit of Dr. Sheridan. I reviewed the town of Canton dog bite reports about regarding incidents.
May we approach?
Yes.